Okay. Is this recording? Oh boy. Okay. Sorry about that. I just missed the beginning of the recording. All right. I didn't know I had to push record again. Okay. Anyway, cool. All right. Let's continue with this then. All right. Let's talk instead about Daniel Kish. All right. So as you'll read in the first chapter of the book, I went mountain biking with Daniel and one of his friends, Brian Bushway, both who have had a lot of experience mountain biking like this. They bringing along a new friend of theirs, another blind individual, whose name I can't remember. I guess it's in the book. But she had never been mountain biking. She had ridden a bike a little bit before, but had never been mountain biking, and it was difficult for her, which was understandable since she had not done this before. Daniel was trying to teach her, and she was able to do a little bit, but watching Daniel and Brian in particular, Brian is younger guy, and has done it a lot and knows the trails really well. And I'll tell you, watching him, you would have no idea that he was completely blind. You know, he'd go over jumps, he'd, kind of ride circles around the rest of us, all that sort of thing. He was really impressive. Here is Daniel. You already saw this, but this is him riding around his neighborhood. And let me tell you a little bit about Daniel. So as I said, he lost his vision when he was quite young, and actually has no light vision at all. He has glass eyes. His eyes are prosthetic, so he has no light vision whatsoever. His parents, if you talk to Daniel, he'll tell you that his parents always encouraged him to be very, very independent. And so he started riding a bike about the same age as sighted kids start riding a bike, and tried as much as it was able to go on bike rides with sighted kids. He didn't know how he was able to do it. He knew he made sound. He knew it had something to do with sound, but he really didn't know anything about echolocation. It wasn't until he was taking a perception class here at UCR where he learned about echolocation. He learned that this is in fact how he was able to do it all those years, and started studying it, and did a kind of master's in rehabilitation for blind kids, and now this is his profession. He goes around the world teaching blind kids to use echolocation to help. Now, probably most blind people use some echolocation. In fact, I'm going to argue that we all do a little echolocation in just a second. But Daniel has really learned to fine tune it. So he makes a clicking sound like that when he's trying to actively echolocate. And sometimes he'll make a different clicking sound depending on how much background sound there is. So he's able to modify the click depending on the environment he's in, depending on how much noise there is in the background. At one point, we passed some construction vehicles, and so there was a lot of background noise, and I heard a very different type of click that he was making. And it's just amazing watching him and Brian do this. What else can I tell you? When we first left his neighborhood, we left Brian's house and then went up some residential streets and then went up to where the mountain trails were. And I asked Brian and Daniel, how can you tell where you are in the neighborhood? I mean, how do you know where the turns are, where the houses are? How can you find your own house? And they said, what we do is we count the driveways. How do you count the driveways? And they said, well, when you click, you can kind of tell the difference between where there's a driveway and where there's grass. So we know that, this is 5 driveways up and it's time to make a turn after that. So they can tell the difference in texture based on the echolocating sounds. In this video here, you see Daniel not only riding around his neighborhood, but also riding around a basketball court that has poles there, and he's able to navigate around the poles that are propping up the baskets, which is pretty amazing. Interestingly, and this is what comes back to this issue of awareness. You know, if you ask Daniel, here he is going around the basketball court. If you ask Daniel what he hears, I mean, how does echolocation sound? He'll be the first one to say it really doesn't sound like anything. This is not an issue of me consciously hearing differences. I do not consciously hear differences in the click. I don't. I click, I have a sense things are out there, but it's not really like I'm consciously hearing how the click changes. It's not really a conscious thing at all. So even somebody who has really fine-tuned the skill so well doesn't have a sense of how exactly his brain is doing it. And that's what I meant by awareness when I said with facial vision. In fact, originally, blind people, before we knew about human echolocation, didn't even know they were doing it by sound, which I think is just fascinating. It's like these unconscious brain processes are doing this really sophisticated analysis of sound so that a blind individual can mountain bike without that individual having any conscious awareness of how that sound is being analyzed. And I think this is an important point for the whole class, that these skills, all the things I'm going to be talking about this quarter, most of them at least, are going to be skills that the brain is doing that we don't really have conscious access to. Now, even this is a kind of an extreme example of this, because even though Daniel has learned to really do this amazing skill, it's not as if he's hearing anything. He's consciously having a sense that something's out there. Oh yeah, as you're riding up the streets, residential streets. Oh yeah, there's a parked car on the right. I can sense it's there. There's a garbage can on the left. I can sense it's there as he's clicking, but he's not hearing differences in the sound per se. And I think that's a really important point for the rest of the class that we're going to be learning this. Okay, not only can Daniel echolocate, so can you. And as I said, within 10 minutes of asking our undergraduates, our freshmen, intro psychology students to do this, okay, everyone was able to do this. Now, they weren't making clicks. We told them, you know, that a lot of blind individuals like to make clicks. It's a good sound. Another good sound, by the way, is like that type of sound, as it turns out. You'll learn why in just a second. There's certain aspects of the acoustics that help, I think. Oh, by the way, I should say something right now. I'm going to try to fix this for next time, but I'm not able to see anybody's hand going up. So right now, so if you have questions, you have comments, anything you'd like to say, just please put it in the chat, okay? Anyway, with say 10, 15 minutes of practice, this is something everybody can do, okay? Which is really interesting. And in fact, this is something that just not my lab has tested. This is stuff that, as you saw, this lab at Cornell has established that people can do this originally. Other labs have tested this too. And actually, for a while, there weren't a lot of people studying echolocation. And in the 1940s, there was tons of people saying, this is an amazing discovery. In the 40s and 50s, there was tons of research on this. Look at humans can do what bats do. Isn't this amazing? Okay. And then, you know, there's less of it, but it's become popular again. It's become popular. The research topic has become popular again, partly because of our understanding of what goes on with this multi-sensory plasticity sort of thing that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Okay. But back in the 50s, some of the things they could establish were that blind individuals and sighted individuals could not only judge things like the distance of a wall, how close they needed to walk to get to it, how much they needed to walk to get to it, but other things as well when they echolocated. So you're seeing another experiment that's actually conducted in the same Cornell laboratory, where they bring in blind and sighted individuals. Can you see this? Yeah. Assuming you can see my cursor here. Here's the subject. And what these experimenters are doing is they are lowering objects on a pulley system that is then situated in front of the subject. And the subject is asked to say how far away the object is, how large the object is, which I realize I don't have in the slides here. You might want to fill that in. They are able to, they're asked to judge how large it is, whether it's a disc, a square, or a triangle shape that's in front of them, and whether it's a piece of wood that the shape is made out of, a piece of wood covered with carpeting, or a piece of metal. Okay, so here are the things subjects are asked to do. They put on headphones probably as the experimenters are putting the next piece in place. They take their headphones off and they say, "Okay, what's in front of you?" And the subject will try to say what it is. They'll testing 1 2. I think this one is about 5 feet in front of me, and it's a big shape this time. And I think it's the disc this time, and I think it's the one made out of wood. Okay. Or next trial, they put the headphones on, they take them off. There's a new object in front of them. Testing. I think this one's about 10 feet away. It's smaller. I think it's the triangle, and I think it's the triangle that's made out of wood and covered with carpeting. And they're not perfect at this. You can imagine how crazy hard this is. They're blindfolded, or they're blind, okay? But they're good enough, so they're better than chance. They are definitely significantly better than guessing. Some things they're very good at. They get very good at determining how far away the object is, and whether it's a big or small or medium-sized object. They're less good, but they're also able to do the shape and the texture. Again, this is not just the blind individuals, it's also sighted individuals who are in the lab practicing this to some degree, but are able to do this as well. I should mention, maybe unsurprisingly, the blind are better at this than sighted. I mean, they have potentially years of practice of doing this, even though they've never maybe been asked to do this explicitly. They're using sound differently. But this is something that that everybody can do, which is pretty amazing. Tomorrow, you're going to learn about whether people are better at this when they're moving towards the object or asked to stop and echolocate from just a standing still position. Okay, we stop here, see if there's any questions about Daniel Kish or non-sighted people echolocating. We're going to get into the different things about the various acoustic information and brain processes, but do you have any questions about Daniel, for example, at this point? Oh, okay, no problem. Just wanted to make sure. All right, then let's talk about the acoustic information for echolocation. Okay. So let's first talk about our bat example. Okay, here's our bat. So when a bat, and this is going to be information that's going to be true whether you're a moving person or a moving bat or a stationary person or a stationary bat. Okay, you'll see what I mean by this. But the bat, let's think about the bat situation. Let's think about this as we can, as intuitively as possible. Do I have an object here I can echolocate with? Hold on a second. Nah, I'll just use my hand. Okay. I'm a bat now. Oh, here. I can't see my video, sadly, so I don't know. Okay, here's a fly. This is, I assume you're seeing this. I'm going to echolocate as a bat. Actually, bats make little chirp sounds, chirp, chirp, like that. It leaves my mouth, goes to the insect, and comes back to my ears. Okay. If the insect is very close, that time between when I emit the sound and when it comes back is going to be shorter than if the object, if the target is very far away. right? Let's just make this. I'll fix this next time so I can see my own video. I'm sorry, I don't know why this isn't working. Let me just see if it's. Hold on a second. Let's do this. Shoot. I really want to see myself. Hold on, just give me a second. There I am. Oh, this wasn't. Hopefully, you've been seeing this the whole time now. Okay, good. Well, this helps a lot. Okay, so say I'm a bat, and it's nighttime here in the waterfalls of the light, and I click, 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 click. If my target is far away, it's going to take longer for the sound to come back than if my target is close up. Okay, close up target, far away target. So potentially, okay, oh, I'm sorry here. What the heck is going on? Okay, good. Potentially, my brain can time the difference between when I make the sound and when the sound is returning to my little bat ears. Okay, so here I go. Eep. There's my bat sound. Leaves my mouth, comes back, goes out, goes all the way to this target here, and comes back. And if my brain can do an analysis of how long it takes the sound to come back, my brain can know something of how far away the object is. Again, here's a much faster return of the sound. Chirp, comes right back to my ears. Okay. And I will, my brain will know it's a closer object. So if my brain can detect the time delay, how long it takes the sound to come back, my brain can use that as a way of doing it. And we know that this is one of the ways that bats do this. Okay? It is also believed this is one of the ways that people do it. This is one of the ways that Daniel Kish does it. This is one of the ways that you would do it if you were in an experiment like this, that your brain would do that timing. Okay? However, it is useful at distances as long as you're 2 meters away from the object. Okay, so 2 meters. Okay, so you guys know what 2 meters is about, right? What's it about? 7 feet, 8 feet, something like that. When you're that far away, what happens is your brain just doesn't have the resolving power to distinguish time differences when you're closer than 2 meters. It just isn't able to use that time delay information. When you're further than 2 meters, it can use that time delay information. When you're closer than 2 meters, you can't. The brain just doesn't have the ability to distinguish times. It's just, our brain can only do too much. So there must be another type of sound because as I said, blind sighted people can walk to the wall and get within inches and stop and say, yep, there it is. There's the wall. I'm very, very close right now. So clearly they're able to still do human echolocation within 2 meters. They just can't use the time delay to do it. There must be another type of cue. There is. Let's talk about this possibility, the intensity ratio of emitted to reflected sound. So what is that? It's just the fact that as a sound leaves a sound source, such as your mouth if you're clicking, the longer the distance it goes and then gets reflected back, the quieter it gets back. It just has to do with sounds that are further away are quieter. You know this, right? If you're, well, I'm sure there's going to be a nice sound system in SoFi Stadium when my son and his girlfriend go to see Taylor Swift. But I think they're sitting pretty far back and the sound won't be as loud where they're sitting than for the folks that spent, $10,000 for front row seats, or it's going to be a lot louder, right? So you know this, right? The closer you are to a sound source, the louder it's going to be. It's just the way, this is how the sound energy disperses in the environment. The farther away you are, the quieter the sound is, right? It's the same thing with with echolocation, whether you're a bat or a human, right? If the reflecting surface is very close, it goes out and comes back, and because it's close, it's going to be pretty loud, and especially the ratio between my click sound that I'm making or my chirp sound that I'm making and the returning sound is going to be, pretty high, versus if the reflected surface is very far away, it's got a longer distance to go. And not only will that mean that the delay for the sound to come back is longer, but because it's got a longer distance to go, it's going to get quieter. So by the time it gets back, it's going to be a quieter sound relative to my emitted sound. So intensity is another way bats and humans are able to determine when they're approaching a wall. Okay, is that going to be helpful closer for 2 meters? I mean, is that the type of sound that's going to be useful when we're within 2 meters, or is the brain again going to be kind of constrained by its ability to determine very subtle loudness or intensity differences? Intensity here is just loudness. You can think of that as loudness if I haven't said that. As it turns out, no, it's not going to be helpful. It's also only really available as a cue for echolocation when we're 2 meters away from the reflecting object. So in the experiments you saw before at Cornell, okay, once subjects got within 2 meters, got pretty close to the wall, they couldn't use this cue anymore. Their brain had to be using another sound cue in order to tell that they were within, say a couple of inches of the wall so they could stop before they got there. Here is the other cue. I should mention right now, I don't like this name, but this is the name we're going to learn it under. It's called ripple noise pitch. Just you'll understand why it's called ripple noise pitch in just a second, but it's not a great name. Ripple noise pitch is this. Okay. Here's the way I like to demonstrate it, if you don't mind doing this. Put your hand out like this in front of your face, and then do this. No, I'm kidding. That was a joke. Instead, do this. Shh. It's much funnier if you do this in a classroom because everyone does it and I laugh. Shh. If you make the sound, shh, and bring your hand up to your mouth as you're making this sound. Shh. Do you hear the sound change as you're bringing your hand up? Yeah, as you're kind of changing the reflecting surface's distance from your mouth. Shh. I hear kind of like it's a swishing sound that changes. Maybe you can even hear this when I do it. Shh. Maybe you can even hear it when I do it. Certainly you should be able to hear it when you do it. Okay. That's what ripple noise pitch is about. Certainly when we're echolocating, it's not as conspicuous as that. I just kind of want to give you a kind of a understanding of what this is by kind of giving you an idea of the type of sound changes that occur, but it's never that clear when you're truly echolocating, but that kind of gives you a sense of what it is. What is it? What's this all about? Well, you're making a sound, shh, and that sound is reflecting off of your hand. And it's actually the ripples that are going out are then being interfered with by the ripples that are coming back. So it's an interference between the emitted sound and the reflected sound. Okay. Go ahead and write that down if you want, but I want to make sure that you understand this. So I'll take a sip of water while you write all that stuff. I shouldn't have put the useful at distances less than 2 meters, but you know that now. It's more important you kind of understand the concept. So this is how I like to think about it. I don't know about you folks, but I love taking bubble baths. All right, I take bubble baths every night. And I as probably most of you who like bubble baths, you enjoy taking bubble baths with your rubber ducky. Okay, So here's what I do. I first fill the bathtub with water. Okay, I add the bubbles at the very end, but because I like this phenomenon to occur. And so once the bathtub is filled with water, I turn off the faucet and I take my rubber ducky. By the way, I found a rubber ducky that looks just like me, so it's Rosenblum the rubber ducky, and I drop it into the bathtub, and he lands hopefully in the middle. That's where I think he enjoys it most. Plop, right there. And what I notice is that once you do that, ripples leave. Like, you're seeing right here. Ripples will leave where he's touched the water. Like, those ripples go out, and then ripples hit the walls of the bathtub and then get reflected back to where the rubber ducky is. And that kind of continues to happen. And what this does, of course, is it gives Rosenblum the rubber ducky a wild ride. It's like, yahoo, this is a great ride for the rubber ducky. Because there are waves emitted from where he hit the water and then reflected from the bathtub. And those waves are interfering with each other. That's what we're talking about here in this case. Shh, just waves leaving my rubber ducky mouth, hitting the bathtub wall and coming back. But the difference in distance is going to determine, the difference in distance between my mouth and the hand is going to determine the type of interference that occurs. Okay, so when it's close, shh, versus far, shh, okay, the type of interference that occurs between my outgoing and incoming sound waves, ripples, okay, are going to tell my brain something about how far away that surface is. And this is known to be the type of information the brain uses when we are close to that surface. It no longer can use the time delay. It no longer can use the loudness differences. It just can't detect those anymore. It's looking for the interference patterns between the outgoing ripples and the returning ripples. That's why it's called ripple noise pitch. Okay, don't worry about it. Just remember the name. Don't worry about the technical details of that term. I don't like it. Okay, but understand it conceptually what's going on. Okay, we know that the brain is switching to that information at that point. Okay, and using it for that purpose. So ripple noise pitch seems to be what allows us to walk right up to the wall and stop before we get there. This is interesting, and I don't have this on the slide, but so if I don't think I'm going to test you on it, I'll let you know if I am. I don't think it's in the book either, but I think you'll find this interesting. Remember before I said that that the blind said they experienced knowing the wall was there by feeling weird pressures on their face, that when they got close, they started to feel like different air currents on their face. It turns out that experience of feeling kind of like pressure on the face happens exactly when the cues for echolocation switch from being time delay and loudness differences to ripple noise pitch. Okay, so as I said, when you get closer and closer, you can't use time delay and intensity ratio or loudness ratio anymore. It switches to ripple noise pitch. It's at that point, for some reason, that the blind or maybe even sighted folks will start to feel things on their face. And we really don't know why that occurs. That's why I probably won't test you on it, is because we don't know why that occurs, but you might be interested to find out that that shift is when it starts to almost feel like like a touch sense, even though it's not. It's all sound. For some reason, that kind of illusion of it being a touch sense, which we know is really an illusion, kicks in when we switch from time delay and time intensity changes to ripple noise pitch. Just think maybe some of you would find that interesting. Okay, cool. Now you know something about how the brain uses sound to do human echolocation. All right. Let's talk about, by the way, class is over at 11:50, correct? Yeah. Good. We're doing fine here. Oh, shoot. Hold on just a second. Okay. All right. Let's talk about a little bit about Daniel Kish in some detail. There he is. And so I don't know, maybe some of you folks have seen Daniel on TV. He used to be on TV a lot. For a while, this was kind of a hot topic in popular press media. If you're a fan of some of the science shows, he's been on Nova. He's been on used to be a show called Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. He was on that. He used to be on a lot of these kind of science shows. So he became kind of famous. And a laboratory that was interested in echolocation, I believe in Sweden, contacted him and asked if they could fly him out and look at his brain and test his skills for human echolocation. He said, sure. And they said, do you know anybody else that you would consider an expert echolocator that, mountain bikes like you? And he said, yeah, my friend Brian Bushway, who one of the guys I mountain biked with as well. So they flew him out and they had him echolocate. The first thing they did is they wanted to see how accurate an expert echolocator could be. So what they had Daniel do is a very simple task. They put objects in front of him. And of course, they knew about all the research done in the 50s that he'd be able to tell the location of an object and if it was a circle and all that stuff. They knew about that. But they wanted to really kind of test his precision and how he's able to do that. And so what they did is they put objects in front of him like this. Don't write that down yet. Let me just show you what they did here. Is they said, okay, there's going to be two objects in front of you, one above the other. And we want you to tell us, is the one on top to the left or the right of the one that's on the bottom? Okay, so is this disc that's on top, is it to the left or right? And here's Daniel would sit back here and he'd go click, click, click. And he's facing this. And in this case, the one on top is a little bit to Daniel's left, right? So he's clicking from here. It's from Daniel's left of the one on the bottom. And so on that one, he would say left. And so they knew that some of these would be easy for Daniel because, they're pretty far apart. And then some of them would be hard because maybe they're almost right above each other. And of course, sometimes they'd be to the right, sometimes they'd be to the left. Okay? So that makes sense as a way for them to test how good he is at it. So here's what they found. When Daniel concentrated, and the same with Brian, they were astonishingly good at determining whether the circle on here's my top circle, or here's my, trying to do this, watching the video. Top circle, bottom circle. Is it a little bit to my left? This is my left now, okay? Or a little bit to the right. Here I am, Daniel. They were amazing because what they found was that they could determine whether it was to the left or right, the top one was to the left or right, if it were just a tiny, tiny bit off. In fact, if it were only like a hair off. And what I have here, this, by the way, I should have identified this sooner. It says 1.2 degrees. That's what DG stands for, degrees. Okay, what does that mean, 1.2 degrees? All right, actually much easier. It sounds technical, but it's a much easier concept than you would probably think. We have 360 degrees around us. Okay, in front of us, okay, what we see is a little bit, I think it's a little bit less than 180 degrees, right? 360 degrees would be a circle around us. Half a circle, what we usually see, okay, at any one time is about 180 degrees, or I can't remember, maybe it's a little less than that, I can't remember. But you understand what I'm saying, it's half of this 360, which means 180. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down. So a single degree is about like this. And guess what? If we had our eyes open and were looking at this apparatus, we would be able to tell if the object on the top was to the left or right of the object on the bottom, if it were about a degree or 2 degrees off. We're talking about very tiny amounts. Remember, 180 degrees, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way. So we're talking about between like here and here. Tiny, tiny little differences. That would be what we could do visually. We're not echolocating now, we're just looking at this little apparatus here visually. We got our eyes open and we're looking at this visually. Daniel and Brian have the same type of resolution as they echolocate. They are as accurate as determining the relative position of 2 objects by echolocating as you and I would be by looking, which is pretty amazing. It is really pretty amazing. I don't think that, folks that aren't experts have that type of resolution, but the fact that the brain would support that type of resolution is pretty amazing, if you ask me. They actually, this laboratory in Sweden actually tested a bunch of other blind folks too, and what they did find, to some degree, was that how good people were at these sort of tests was dependent on when they lost their vision. Okay, so Brian lost his vision a little later than Daniel, but he was still in his childhood. If people lose their vision in adulthood, they're echolocating, and there certainly is this cross-sensory, kind of compensation I've been talking about, but they're not going to be able to do 1.2 degrees of difference between the position of the objects like Daniel and Brian would do. So having a early blindness is going to make a difference, that's for sure. And sighted folks aren't going to be able to do that type of resolution, but the fact again that the brain can do this at all, that the echolocating brain can rival that of the visual brain is just amazing. And in a way, how I just phrased that is inaccurate. Because for folks like Daniel and folks like Brian, the echolocating brain is the visual brain. So here's what they found. This is one of the most interesting findings from this laboratory in Sweden. When Brian and Daniel echolocate, and actually other blind folks echolocate, they actually are activating not just the hearing parts of their brain, but the visual parts of their brain. And you'll find this interesting because this is when they're trying to determine the location of something through reflected sound. Okay. So this is a situation where they're echolocating and trying to determine, and actually I think what they did is they recorded Daniel echolocating different objects, like probably these sorts of things, and then played them back to Daniel from this, from the same position, basically. So he's getting them through headphones. And when there is echolocation information available, it does activate his visual brain areas. So when he hears something that's going to give information about location based on the reflected sound, his visual brain does get activated. Versus if he just hears clicks that aren't being used for echolocation, he doesn't. In that case, if he's just hearing clicks, even if they're his own clicks, but it's not a click that was used for echolocation, there's nothing in front of him, the microphone is right at his mouth rather than, say, in a place where you could detect the reflections, his visual brain wouldn't be activated. So here's what we need to get from this. That when echolocating, when using sound for echolocating, at least for these blind individuals, their visual brain areas become activated. But if they're just clicks that are not being used for echolocation, the visual areas are not being activated, which is really, really interesting, right? Because what it suggests is that the visual brain area is willing to help, okay, for hearing, for someone like Brian and someone like Daniel. But it's only willing to help if it has to do with being able to perceive something in space, or if being able to perceive a location of something. If it just comes to a click, the visual system, the visual brain area says, auditory brain, you can help it. But if it needs to use those clicks to determine locations of things, okay, then it says, I will help. Which is kind of cool, because the visual brain area seems then maybe not just to be useful for vision, but to be useful for determining locations and what's in front of a person for space. So cross-sensory compensation, okay, is a really cool thing, but it might be cool for very precise reasons having to do with perceiving the locations of things in front of you. Okay, we'll talk more about that next class. All right, any last minute questions? All right, I'll see everybody on Thursday. Enjoy your discussion section tomorrow.